Welcome back to the Masters of the Universe Classics Director's Commentary with me, your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich, the brand manager for the line at Mattel. And today, as you can tell from the slowly scrolling graphic, we're talking about Catra. So for a lot of fans, Catra was representative of more females in the line, and really a key difference between a line sold directly to collectors online versus a line at retail. When you're selling to collectors, you could basically do as many females as you possibly want because you're not concerned at all about the kid purchase and whether or not boys, who are the traditional target for action figures, are interested in getting a lot of female characters. Not that there's anything wrong with them getting female characters, but doing an adult collector line meant we could do all the females we wanted. And it was time to start branching out beyond just kind of the top tier females of Evelyn and She-Ra and Teela. And is Panther a girl? I don't know if Panther is a girl. I always kind of imagine Panther as a boy, but Panther could be a girl. Anyway, Catra traditionally, or at least originally, was She-Ra's archenemy and nemesis. But that did change a little bit as Filmation took over, and she was adapted into the evil Horde team, if you will, and became one of the major players in the Filmation series, and in a lot of ways, Hordak's number 2 on Etheria. Well, I guess maybe Shadow Weaver. Now, if Catra had been in the vintage Masters of the Universe line, she would have been executed from a toy perspective as an action figure, like Teela, the Sorceress, and Evelyn were. These were female action figures. But that's not the way Catra appeared. When Catra made her first appearance, it was in the She-Ra Princess of Power line, which was a doll line put out by the girls group. The She-Ra character was originally developed by the boys group, but the girls group essentially took it over once they heard what the boys group were doing after they saw sales of the vintage MOTU line was selling heavily, well, not heavily, but significantly to female fans, girls, essentially. And they wanted to develop a girls line, but the girls group basically took over development and changed them from action figures to dolls, meaning they had rooted hair and they had removable outfits that you could swap around for both hair play and fashion play, which are two of the major doll play patterns. The original storyline that went with Catra and went with all of the She-Ra Princess of Power figures when they were first released, whether it was in the storybooks or in the mini-comics, did always position Catra as the major adversary to She-Ra. As I said, this was before Filmation and before she became a member of the Horde. She was just She-Ra's archenemy on Etheria, and her motivations, while she did want to take over the planet and rule, it was much more about, shall we say, creating mischief and being jealous of She-Ra, which again were sort of two doll themes as far as storytelling. There's definitely different storytelling when you are designing a doll toy versus designing an action figure toy. Action figures are inherently more aggressive and are more about battling. Dolls are more about fashion and beauty and, as I said, hair play and fashion play, which means removing the outfits and swapping them around and having different outfits, much like Barbie or Monster High, which are also doll lines produced by Mattel. So the content that Catra appeared in, while she definitely did some mean things and, kidnapped people and tied them up to icicles and all sorts of stuff, and she did want to take over the planet, it was always from a jealousy and a just sort of causing mischief perspective. In fact, that was even called out on package, she was called a jealous beauty, and all of her sort of bio copy back in the day always talked about the mischief she would create, specifically using that word. Eventually, Catra was going to be reimagined in the Netflix series as a little bit of a different character, still a member of the Horde, and her relationship with Adora was, well, shall we say, a little bit different than it was in Filmation or in Classics or any of the vintage material. But obviously the Netflix show came much, much later, so it didn't have any influence on Classics at all, and this was just a reinterpretation of Classics. not Classics, of Catra, excuse me. All right, let's talk about the Horde a little bit, though, because it's important to see how she evolved and became a member of the Horde. So this pack that had Hordak and Grizzler in it, it included a book and a book on tape that was the first written material about the Horde, although I think it shipped much later after they'd already been introduced. But this book, which was written by Tim Kilpin, who was the brand manager at the time, and he's responsible for a lot of the mini comics and for creating the Snake Men and a lot of other aspects of Masters of the Universe. He created the Horde, at least, or helped create them. He had more of a hand in the Snake Men, to specifically be a villain that could take on both He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and could also be a villain against Skeletor, creating a sort of three-way triangular battle structure, I guess you could say, where, each corner of the triangle was battling the others, as opposed to just a Skeletor versus Masters and He-Man motif. And Hordak was created for the Masters of the Universe line, but later sort of absconded into Filmation as She-Ra's archenemy. But his original purpose, as laid out in this little booklet that eventually was packed with that Grizzler 2-pack, showed how he was originally meant, which was also actually inspired by a tiki mask hanging on Design's wall. So, although today we really look at the Horde as the enemy of She-Ra on Etheria, especially for how it was portrayed in the Filmation series and then later in the Netflix series, the Horde was originally created as a MOTU villain, which is why all the Horde characters appeared in Masters of the Universe packaging and not She-Ra packaging. So the villains for She-Ra, like Catra here, eventually were sort of reimagined as members of the Horde when they were put on Filmation, and she got sort of a different look on Filmation, removing some of the pink and silver, which were more hair, doll colors and elements, and she was made to look a bit more like, well, I guess like an action figure, and what she might have looked like had she been released in the Masters of the Universe line, much like Teela or Evil-Lyn or Hordak. Now, whether we were going to do her in her doll colors or her Filmation colors was definitely something that was under heavy debate when we were looking at bringing her into the Filmation series. I'm sorry, the Classic series. Boy, I need my coffee this morning. This is a fan creation it's a repaint of what she would look like done in her doll colors. But in the end, we definitely leaned towards the Filmation colors, sort of what we call the action figure colors, because Classics was an action figure line, not a doll line. So we wanted to do all of the figures as if they hypothetically were released in the classic Masters of the Universe packaging, again like Teela or Evil-Lyn, as action figures, not as dolls. Plus, her Filmation look was a little bit more iconic, being, on TV and having content and, et cetera, et cetera. So choosing to go with these colors definitely won out in the end. We did talk about doing a lot of the Princess of Power figures in their doll colors with rooted hair, but we just never got to that. That kind of would have been like another line, sort of like the Filmation series in 2016. So for the original release, though, we were going to do all of the POP characters as action figures, not dolls, imagining what they would have looked like had they been released as part of the MOTU line in the 80s, not Princess of Power. Another quick thing to talk about with Catra was she got a new hand, which was the cat scratching hand, which was really great because it gave us another tool to use for a female figure. And we kind of tried to use this to get away with using it as a spell casting hand on some of the magical characters, like Castaspella, but to this day, I don't think it worked as well. We just didn't have the tooling for Castaspella to give her yet another hand. So it was either the Catra hand or just the gripping hand. Like I said, a lot of compromises always had to be made with these figures. Catra did, though, have quite a few what I would call bridge too far concepts that we really wanted to do for her. So as the main villain in the POP toy line and mini comics, she had her own mounts, if you will, much like Battlecat and Panther and Swiftwind. So one of her mounts was a pink lion that would have been relatively easy to do using the Panther and Battlecat buck and painting it pink and giving it fluffy pink hair. as well as Storm, her horse with wings. Everybody got a winged horse back in the day. And again, we could have used a Swiftwind buck. And both Claudine and Storm were on the master list, but we just basically never got to them. We also talked about doing Catra in her cat form, and this would have taken a full figure. There was a Filmation series, Cringer, that was planned, and the idea was then we would reuse the Cringer buck for Catra's cat form, because it would be fully articulated, but again, the new team changed that up and never got to Cringer. And then, one last time to touch again on the Netflix series. While it reimagined her, the bio was well before Netflix, and we tried to rely on vintage material for that. So while Horde wound up supplanting Catra as the main villain for She-Ra and sort of took that over, and Catra became more of a, served under Horde, for lack of a better word, and was no longer the main villain. There's a lot of fans out there that remember her as She-Ra's #1 enemy, because that's how she was originally sold. And we definitely wanted to, pay homage to that as well as making sure she had accessories that paid homage to her original doll release. So that included not just her sword and her shield and her removable cat mask, which we also included the vintage mask, the silver one there. But of course, there was also the infamous whip comb. So again, since she was originally a doll when first released and had rooted hair, all the figures came with combs. And we started releasing POP figures like we did with Adora and She-Ra with kind of a comb weapon, like a comb axe. And, this kind of petered out. I don't think it made it really past Catra. We didn't include this with every POP figure, but it was a nod to how she was originally a doll before she became an action figure. I wish we could have gotten to the doll version. It would have been fun. It would have been a great way to revisit her. But hey, getting to make a Catra action figure was really cool, and I'm glad the way we pulled her off. She's an awesome figure and a great addition to the Horde. Go Catra.